Thank you. Before you can be a billionaire, you need to first of all lead a good business. And so let's talk about leadership that matters. That's our next conversation this morning. You see, Nigeria is inundated with rich human and material resources begging to be harvested by purposeful, creative, and innovative leadership. Interestingly, okay, we'll get there. So leadership that is based on the cultural values of the people and takes a bottom-up approach holds the key to unlocking development quagmire. The development quagmire in Nigeria has found itself. But this is not the case due to leadership failure, corruption, bad governance, and an endless list. President Bola Tinubu in India said, and I quote, "We're not poor in knowledge, we're not poor in human resources, we're only poor in management and leadership. And that is why I ran for president, to help all of us mold the soul of our democracy, the soul of our country in the right direction." What's this about? So when the president is saying we are poor in management and leadership, exactly what do you think he is talking about? Two gentlemen join us this morning for this conversation. Professor Vincent Anibogwu is Director General, International Institute for National Transformation. He joins us alongside Olatunji Shobodu, who is Dr. Olatunji Shobodu, founder and CEO, Emet Leadership Academy. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Prof, let me begin with you, this conversation. What do you make of the president's comments when he says we don't have a problem of knowledge or human resources or even resources? Because there is hardly a state in Nigeria that doesn't have solid minerals buried and arable land all over the place. So when he says we are only poor in management and leadership, what exactly do you think he is talking about?
Thank you, Mr. Good morning, Mr. Lero. I think the president is correct when he made that statement that the challenge Nigeria faces is not our resources. We have them. It is leadership first and foremost, and then management. Why? Because you can have all the knowledge, but if you don't know how to process them, and by the way, processing them requires discipline. So you have to have a people that have the patience, first of all, to learn the skills of processing what they have, and then also the patience to that process so that they can produce the expected outcome. Unfortunately, our culture has a lot of good aspects. There are a lot of things in African cultures that I will never throw away, such as value for human life, value for communities. But there are aspects of our culture that does not teach us the patience we need to research, find out fundamental principles that are buried in life. Let me give you a simple example. We have lived with birds and chickens for years. But today, when people see chicken, they only eat as seafood or demon. You know, if a bird flies into that particular place where you are now, out of nowhere, the first thought is they have come again. And with the white man will look at it from principal perspective. Did the bird enter the, did they fly? They are the mechanisms by which the bird entered that place. Out of that, they will build an airplane and create a massive industry. So we need to reorientate and begin to learn and apply principles that are buried around us. And to do that, we have to cultivate the culture of research and development, asking questions about our environment. Right now, we're just looking for what to pluck and eat, not what to dig and process. And until that mindset is cultivated, we will continue. Education is the key for reorientating our people in the right direction.
Let me ask Dr. Shobodu. My first question to you is a response or a quick reaction, initial reaction from one of our viewers right now. When we announced that we're going to be talking about leadership that matters, one of the first things he said was that we need to think about it in the light of the quality of leaders or the tract through which leadership is selected in Nigeria. He said, and I quote, "Most politicians are not leaders or are leadership without a why." What do you think that he could have in mind for saying that? Do you agree with him, by the way?
Well, thank you again for inviting me this morning. Well, I would start by saying there are different kinds of leaders, and there are good leaders and there are bad leaders. And bad leaders are not limited to politicians, neither are they limited to private sector operators. You have good leaders and bad leaders everywhere. Of course, the process that produces a leader ought to ordinarily result in the selection of a good leader. But again, who is a good leader? Who is a bad leader? That's up to the populace or to the electorate or whatever the process, determinants are to be the ones to judge. And that may very well be where there is even a problem. And I dare say that it is even possible that those who are selecting or electing a leader may not even know who a good leader is, who a good leader ought to be. So it is possible for a selection process to produce a bad leader, all right? Whereas the people thought that that person is a good leader, and vice versa is the case. So talking about the point that that person made, it needs to be made clear. The fact that somebody is a politician doesn't mean he or she is a bad leader. All right, politicians are not inherently bad leaders. Among politicians, there are good leaders. Don't forget as well that some of those who are in politics came from the private sector. We often tend to think that good leadership is limited to the private sector. It's far from the truth. So within different, categories of stakeholders in any nation, in any, economy, you have both good and bad leaders. The point is
the interesting angle to that is, that's actually coming from the angle of what the president said when he said the challenge Nigeria has is that of management and leadership, a deficit in management and leadership. Perhaps that's the reason this fellow made that comment. So in terms of looking at it from that perspective, not just at the federal level, but at the state level as well. And then also look at it from the perspective of the fact that there are different cadres of leadership, even in government. I often contend that there are elected leaders, there are appointed leaders, and then there are employed leaders. So when the president made that comment, is it something you think is holistic or it's just segmented to any of these three?
Well, I love the fact that the president identified that point, and that is true. Like Prof said also, I mean, that is true. If we had good leaders at whatever level, we won't be where we are today. I mean, we often say everything rises and falls on leadership. If we had good leaders, if we've had a spate more good leaders than bad leaders across the various levels, we will not be where we are today. Good leadership is not exemplified by a rundown of a nation or a rundown of a system. Good leaders, are instruments of growth, are instruments of prosperity. Good leaders are people who understand the place of resources and how to mobilize their people, to use those resources productively, effectively. They help to enhance the welfare of the people. So the totality of that statement is right. The totality of that statement is right. And I think it would be defeatist. That doesn't mean that everyone who has played a leadership role, whether they're appointed or elected or, has been a failure. But what it means is that as a nation, in totality, from a wholesome or aggregate point of view, we have failed on account of, poor leadership. And the statement that the president made is very instructive. It is instructive, one, because he identifies it, two, because he says, now I'm putting myself, that was why I ran for this job. And that is, embracing responsibility and indeed a willingness to put himself out there to be held accountable. And that's a good starting point. That's an indication, of someone who means business. And I know, Ayo, that you normally try to, emphasize that, well, yes, it doesn't end at the level of the president. There are different levels of leadership. But it starts always with the overall head. As they say, the fish gets rotten from the head. It always starts from the overall head. And that's why we often focus, on the head when you're talking leadership. And that's why, coming from the president himself, this statement is very, very instructive. Of course, I believe the details of how to then take the bull by the horns, we'll discuss as we go on.
Professor, Dr. Shobodu talked about good leaders and bad leaders, and sometimes how political parties throw up leaders who are not necessarily good, but it is the electorate that does the selection. So in selecting our leaders or electing our leaders, whichever word you decide to use, what do we look out for as those who are responsible for actually putting them in position?
Thank you, Mr. Lero. Excellent, excellent question. I always say that every Nigerian has a right to run for an office. It is dependent on the INEC and authorities that are assigned to oversee the process to qualify or disqualify them. And then, of course, once they are qualified, Nigerians must have the tools for us and then electing them. Let me just give you a couple of things we should look out in selecting leaders. Number one, what is their moral compass? What is their moral compass? Why is that important? The moral value of your leader ultimately determines the environment of the nation. What they tolerate will be tolerated in the nation. What they judge will be judged by those under them. So it's extremely important that we know the moral inclination of those we are electing, because ultimately their value system will become the national value system. Number two, we must assess their emotional compass. How stable are they as individuals? How stable are they emotionally? What is their sense of fairness and equity? We may not, and we do not come from the same backgrounds. We do not, and we must have leaders that tolerate other people's group and respect them. That's what the Constitution says. So we must measure people's emotional compass. Number three, we must understand and assess their intellectual capacity. As I said, running a nation is a hard work. There's so many systems and processes that need to be juggled and twisted. The economy, transportation sector, the health sector, and what have you. So the person must have the mental capacity is to understand the solutions being provided by different sectors. Ultimately, they have to make the decision. The buck stops with the national leader. So they must have the intellectual ability to process what's being presented to them. Number four, their social compass, ability to be sensitive to the needs of the people. You must know when to play political games. You must know when to be a human being that the populace touch. They must have a sense that you care for them, that you're human, you have a heart. And that's the social aspect that also need to be assessed. And finally, the health, the vitality of the individual, the ability to be creative, innovative, go beyond the natural boundaries and look for solutions. So in summary, their moral compass is number one because it determines not just the political environment, but even the economic environment. The emotional health, their intellect, their social intelligence, all of this will ultimately determine an effective leader. But like my presenter, Mr. Olatunji said, if you don't teach people how to look for these things, then they don't know what to look for. So our universities, our secondary schools, emphasis on civic education. We need to respond. You can inspect what you do not introduce in people. So I think it will require fundamental restructuring of our education system to make sure that people are properly equipped in order to make these assessments. That would be my initial take, Mr. Lero.
Let me come to you, Dr. Shobodu. Something you said the other time that, everything starts from the top because that's where everyone else gets their tone. I believe you in the space call it tone at the top or something like that. A number of other people call it body language. Now, the engine of governance is a very, very huge and complex one. And as we mentioned the other time, the leadership strata are quite varied. The leadership spheres are also diverse. While we're talking about Nigeria as a country, we also have states. Over the years, and it's one of the things that we had that was mentioned in the first conversation we had about taking Nigeria from a consuming nation to a producing nation. Someone talked about vision. There can be no leadership without vision. Over the years, we've been talking about the need for Nigeria to have a national ethos, towards which every sphere of government, every influence is channeled. At some point, Lagos State seemed to have that, and consequently, we are celebrating so many milestones in Lagos today. Unfortunately, Lagos is not the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So what is it? And that's the reason we were talking about the different strata of leadership particularly at the subnational levels. And there are 36 of them at the very least. That the president only happens to be governor in the FCT as well, if we can put it that way. So in terms of setting a national ethos that everyone must line up with in the country for a long, sustained period, what needs to happen? In the federal government, for instance, it's a 4-year tenure of maximum 2 terms. How much of that tone setting and sustainability can be achieved within 8 years before another president comes that could decide, I'm going to do away with this one and start something fresh? So how do we set a sustainable national ethos or national vision that everybody must line up with?
All right, thank you. When you look at we often talk about the president's 8-point agenda, and when you put it side by side with the statement the president made about leadership, I think there is a missing point on that agenda. Probably that point should have been number 1, and that point is leadership development. Leadership development. If you understand, if you acknowledge that we have everything, all right, and what we lack is management and leadership, then why isn't leadership development on that agenda? And leadership development speaks directly to this critical issue, because every other thing that you have listed on the 8-point agenda is dependent on the quality of leadership, and it doesn't matter, and that applies to all levels. So let me start from there. Now, let's even talk about 4 years and not talk about 8 years. The 4-year term for one who is a good leader is enough to change the face of Nigeria, because the focus of a leader isn't so much on all those 8-point elements. It's on the development of leadership capacity and capability in the people. Leadership is first about people than any other thing. When you focus on the people, you develop people, all right, things will take off from that point. And that's why we often counsel good leaders to focus on succession from day 1. Succession, prepares you for the fact that, as I said recently, that leaders are appointed or elected for a season. Leadership is not an all-season responsibility. So you need to prepare for that time, because the time will come when you have to yield the seat to somebody else. Now, the value, the contribution...
Before interjecting, Dr. Shobodi, we're in a democracy. I know it's a little complex, but hey, we're in a democracy. The fellow can only be employed by the people through elections once every 4 years at the executive level. Now, in terms of succession, you are spot on, but please help me understand how we can systemize succession in a democracy of about how many parties that we have now? Quite a number of political parties, almost 20, if memory serves me right. So help me understand that for those who are wondering, what's Dr. Shobodu talking about?
Now, let's use Lagos as an example. Now, many people may debate it, but Lagos is what it is today. Lagos is what it has been over the last, 24 years, because of precisely the concept of succession. Lagos had the opportunity of having the current president for a period of 8 years. The current president, I believe one of the things that distinguishes him and that points to the fact that he has something to offer as a credible leader is that he had developed people who were able to put themselves forward, to be trusted by the people to succeed him. So succession is possible within the context of democracy, because if you're a good leader, people want your legacy to continue. And so when you have people that you have trained who have become part of, getting the job done while you were there, and they acknowledge, the quality of what you have done, those people will be favored at the polls. That's how, for the most part, it has been. People can talk about it, but look, the person who is the governor, Sanwo-Olu today, has been in the government since the days of Asiwaju. He has held positions there. He had held positions subsequently. The same thing. You can list them. It's one of the things I believe that made him different from others. You saw people who had been trained, who had been developed by him, who had been given leadership responsibilities, who have proved their mettle, the likes of, Beraji Fashola. Now, so it is possible within the context of the democracy. In fact, what have we learned also? Many of the initiatives that he implemented in Lagos and that have been sustained over time and built upon by those who have succeeded him, in quotes, they have been embraced and adopted in other states. That's an indication of the kind of influence that good leadership can have. Now, what it means, therefore, within the context of a democracy, is that if your party is such that offers that quality of leadership, all the other parties have to wake up if they want any chance of getting there. So they also have to come up with people, who they can offer as credible alternatives. And that means those people must have the kind of resume that compares effectively with the ones who have been ruling. So there is a sense in which, if we are all focused on what good leadership really means, democracy itself helps us to upgrade the quality of our leadership. So I hope that addresses the point. If you look at the fact that, yes, we go to vote. Yeah, we go to vote, but we don't go to vote blindly. We go to vote, with something that we have an expectation and we have observed. So if we have people or a party who have been there, we're looking at what has the party done, we're looking at what has the individual done, and we're going, to the polls with that. And we're doing that in relation to the options that others are bringing forward. So we really, if we get the issues of leadership right from this perspective, democracy will help us to even further build the quality of leadership, that we have in place. And so where we are starting today, the challenge before the president is on beginning to look at issues of succession, beginning to identify people, beginning to focus on leadership development, because what if all you want to do is to say, okay, I'm offering myself that's why I stepped forward. I know I can provide good leadership, but let's be clear that what good leadership is to do the same kind of thing that you did in Lagos, where you focused on developing leaders who will outlast you. The success of a leader, unfortunately, is not measured while the leader is in the position. It's measured after the leader has left. It's a lot less about what the leader does while he's there. It's much more about what happens after you have left. And I hope that is the kind of thinking that is running in the mind of the president. And one has reason to trust him, that he knows what he's talking about, if we use a Lagos as an example.
Professor, the president has acknowledged that we are only poor in management and leadership. So he has made that confession, and that gives the impression that, well, it doesn't give the impression, because he acknowledges it, and that is why I ran for president, which means he is going to do something about it. What kinds of things are you expecting him to do to correct this?
Thank you so much, Alero. That's a very big responsibility His Excellency has taken on. Let me give you an example recently, and I'm sure many of us saw that. The recent meeting of Nigerian Bar Association, the treasurer of the organization stood up and said, I'm being given a statement to read and to sign that I'm not part of. That's the level of corruption we have seen in the nation. The elites of Nigeria, and I'm not saying all of them, but somehow there's something that's happening to the elites of Nigeria. We no longer have a sense of moral responsibility. So if the president is going to be effective, the first thing that must happen is we must address the issue of corruption. And he has to do it by starting at the top. The Prime Minister of Singapore had a zero corruption policy in Singapore. To demonstrate it, he persecuted the top ministers in his administration. By the time he sent one or two of them to prison, everybody else below knew that this prime minister is serious. People will be looking to see how His Excellency addresses issue of corruption in the top leadership of his government. If they see that, then they will know that indeed he has come to address. Why? Because if you don't address corruption at the top, then it gives all the people below them the license and the freedom to also practice the same. So that will be my first expectation, and that will create the right environment to now attract even foreign direct investment. They will know that Nigeria is ready to move forward. That will be my first comment, Alero.
Thank you, Dr. Shobodu. One of the things I personally have contended with over the years, especially in my practice, is the paucity of communication, or should I say effective communication, between the governed and the government. A good number of times, of course, we have Ministry of Information most of the time, especially at the federal and state levels. But giving information is essentially just putting it out there for the people to do with as they wish. But communication is a different ball game. Communication is a very complex process. And if you would recall, Peter Drucker said that one of the most important things in communication is to hear what isn't being said. Now, in terms of communication for leaders or leadership, what do we need to get right? A good number of times people have their heads in a particular direction as far as anything government is involved or is concerned. Anything that comes from government or with the appendage of government is taken in a particular context. And without the people...
With suspicion.
Exactly. And without the people, there can really be no government, so to speak, because, hey, and then there can be no leadership, because you can't lead yourself. If you can't lead people if you can't lead yourself. And if you are leading without having the following, you're just taking a walk. So what do we need to get right in terms of engaging the people for effective communication that produces the kind of feedback that government intended? Let's begin to close with that, Dr. Shobodu.
Okay, well, yes, I mean, the people need a leader, because the leader is as important to the people as the people are as important to the leader. The truth, however, is that it's not quite a two-way thing in terms of benefit, because whether we like it or not, the people stand to benefit from the leader, because the progress of the people is hinged on the leader. That's why we're talking about leadership at this point. But one of the greatest challenges of leaders is to secure the faith of the people, the trust and respect. Now, those three come together. No leader who understands leadership will take those for granted. That's the first thing that you need to earn. And it makes the president's offer to lead even more challenging because of the current environment. He needs to secure the trust, the faith of the people in his leadership. Without that backend, quite frankly, a leader is limited. Until the people believe in you, you really can't make much of an impact. Now, the issue of communication is crucial, because if people must believe in you, it starts first with what we have talked about. What is in it for the people? You have to communicate and keep communicating, and communicate indeed, not just putting words out or statements out. That means ensuring that the people understand, and that takes a lot of repetition. A lot of repetition. You must keep speaking about what plans you have, how it's going to benefit them in the language that they can understand. That's the first thing. I mean, people can talk about, well, people need to walk their talk. That's the next thing. Before you walk, there must be talk first. Otherwise, there's no talk to walk. You must talk first. There is no alternative to a leader. A leader who does not speak, a quiet leader, is a weak leader, can't achieve much. So leaders must place a lot of emphasis on communication. It wasn't there in the last regime. I'm hoping that it's going to be better this time around. Communication is key. The second thing is now that you must walk that talk. All right? People will hear you. And it's good to set that expectation. And it's good to set that expectation so that when you begin to deliver, they can appreciate that you are delivering. And so the next thing, once you have communicated, is that you need to deliver. You need to walk that talk. All right? And the moment as you begin to walk the talk, yes, more people begin to trust you. More people begin to believe in you. And when they believe in you, the importance of that for a leader is they then line up behind you. You can then count on them to cooperate with you to get the job done. That's the dynamic of leadership. That's how you need to win the hearts of the people so that they can strongly commit to you. Because the reason that there is a leader is because he can't do the job by himself. He needs people to help him. So having people who are following you is not for fun. Is that they need to cooperate with you. They need to support you in order to get the job done. Okay?
So, Prof. Pardon me, Dr. Shobodu. Same question, Prof., but from the perspective of transformation, of national transformation. I think about a week or two ago, we were talking about national orientation, and we were talking about the need for government not just to initiate it, but to also sustain it. So in terms of communicating with government in a sustainable manner, since we have tried it before, and a good number of times people are asking, where is the National Orientation Agency in this? Interestingly now, the federal government has renamed the Federal Ministry of Information as the Federal Ministry of Information and National Orientation. In terms of leadership, what is it that we should be hearing from the government through the Federal Ministry of Information and National Orientation for the people to take ownership of the nation, not just the initiative of the president or the federal government, but of the nation, and take it with themselves everywhere they go?
Thank you so much, Ayo. One of the things that's lacking in our media, beyond the propaganda we see every time, is that people don't understand the cost of their behavior to the society. They don't really understand the little things they do every day, how cumulatively it affects the nation. That's the job of the National Orientation Agency, to teach us, to help us to understand. I tried in the past to work with that organization since I moved back to Nigeria. And I must admit that I have not been very successful. If you monitor what happened in Singapore, I always refer to Singapore because it's a model that has worked. They were where we were in the past, and they have moved on to develop a full community, a viable nation. So what did they do? They used every available platform to teach the people, not just radio and television, but even social organizations. For example, everywhere that people gather, be it age grade, be it church groups, be it groups, whatever, everywhere people gather, they find a way to penetrate that platform and he used it to teach and train the people. It was a massive effort. For example, Ayo, can you believe that when high-rises were built in Singapore, that people were still taking their goods and their pets to the high urinating in the elevators? But it took consistent orientation programs through cultural organizations to finally change those habits. So the National Orientation Agency should engage all the platforms where people gather. They should develop a program to train our people how or what it takes to run effective society, their civic responsibilities, and then work with community leaders at various levels across the nation to implement this program. Of course, it's going to cost money, but the benefit would be a system would have been changed, and of course, leading to not just social welfare, but even economic development. That we have not taken.
Cost us more than money, it'll cost us a lot more time. Which leads to this last one, Prof. Someone sent us a mail. Akabom Enebong says, you need to focus more on the challenge of corruption if we have to make any progress. We've talked about that not once, not twice in our national life, be it at the federal or state level. How significant is that conversation around corruption in this whole conversation around leadership that matters, be it federal or state level?
Very significant. In fact, it is the number one. And the reason that corruption has fostered in Nigeria is because the culprits are not caught and punished, to punish people who systematically and consistently engage in corrupt practices. People will sit up, but they see, and I'm sorry to say, they see people who are guilty, or at least have been accused of such practices, being around free. That sends a message to the younger generation that you can do anything literally and go with it. And that's why I go back and say, one thing that this government must do, if indeed, given that corruption is on the among the 8-point agenda that they want to address, they must show examples by again fairly not only addressing that issue, but actually sentencing to prison people on top who have engaged in such practices. That will send a strong across the nation. And
we have also seen, Prof, without meaning to extend the conversation any longer, we have also seen situations where people who are caught or, indicted for corruption have gone to jail and left jail and be given presidential pardon. So it goes back to the issue of signals that you're speaking about. Well, it's another conversation starter we've had here, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your time. Professor Vincent Anebogu is Director General, International Institute for National Transformation. He joined us along with Dr. Olatunji Shobodu, who is founder and CEO, Emet Leadership Academy. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time this morning, and all the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right. We're back right after now to talk about how do we lead teenagers. Okay, no, that's not the word. Let's first of all understand that teenager before we can lead them. That's up on Lifestyle when we return.